Well, it brings joy. It brings fun. It brings connectedness, and
Yeah.
community is right there
Yeah.
along with physical activity and nutrition.
Hi, and welcome to Fit Kids Conversations. I'm Kirsten Hammond, and I'm here with Dr. Amy Bantham today, author of Move to Live More and CEO and founder of the organization Move to Live More and podcaster.
Yes, I picked a name and I stuck with it because it's all about helping people move for longer life and for better life.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I love the podcast. I've read the book. I love the book. And I want to just kind of dive in.
Let's do it.
I'm going to steal one of my favorite questions that you ask in your podcast, which is, what is your origin story around movement and your path to this career that you've made for yourself?
Yeah, and I promise I won't go back too far.
No, I'm hoping you will. I don't know if it was the podcast or in the book, but you talked about not being particularly active and not having confidence. And you described that moment of the rope,
Yes.
which I think is something that most people who were children in the 70s and 80s can relate to.
Yes, I was not. I do talk about it in the book. I was not a particularly active youth.
Mhm.
I did run track,
Okay.
but I was injured. So I say my running career was over before it ever really
Mhm.
got going.
Right.
But I do remember being picked last in gym class. I remember the presidential youth fitness test
Yeah.
where I was hanging and having everyone watch me, and it just felt like a very traumatizing experience. And then
Yes.
having children myself, I have twins. One very much thrives on competition, and one very much does not. And as a parent and caregiver, trying to get them moving and be happy moving and
Uh-huh.
learn to love movement, it's certainly been a challenge there. But I guess my entry into the industry, into the sector, was through my role as a fitness professional.
Mhm.
Love teaching group fitness. I still teach group fitness today. I do it 3 hours a week, and I have students who are in their 20s, and my oldest student, I think, is early 90s. And so I
Wow.
love getting people moving through group fitness. But it was really through my work with the Health and Fitness Association Foundation, which is focused on expanding access to movement for
Mhm.
people who might not traditionally walk into a health and fitness center. And it was through that work that I realized that I wanted to do more to get more people moving, particularly the inactive and the insufficiently active. And that's when I went back and got my doctor of public health and focused on connecting the healthcare and the health and fitness and community sectors, and launched Move to Live More, started the podcast.
Mhm.
And it was really the pandemic
Mhm.
and my experience and my city's experience with the pandemic, and then the aftermath when I saw the extent to which my kids, my neighbors' kids, my community's kids were really struggling
Yeah.
with learning loss, with mental health. And that was really when I wanted to capture that moment in time. And I wrote Move to Live More as a guide for my fellow parents and caregivers and fitness professionals and coaches for how we can get kids moving.
Wow, that's an amazing story, and I love to hear how it started because I think I also identify as someone who wasn't necessarily naturally active and didn't have that confidence, and for me, a lot of, movement or fitness related content and material, I kind of filter because I've always thought previously there are 2 kinds of people, people who are naturally physically fit and active and people who aren't. And I'm just this other kind of person. And so hearing your story, it really shows that it's not this binary.
It's a continuum,
Right.
and really there are organizations that say we are about empowering all youth to see themselves as athletes, and I love that as long as it is truly the case. And to me, it's not athlete as in competitive athlete.
Right.
It's someone who loves to move. And I talk a lot about physical literacy, someone who
Yes.
has the confidence, skills, and desire to be active for life. That to me is our goal.
You talked a little bit about your career and how varied it is, and you talked a little bit about why the book now. Do you think that there's more kind of in our culture or in this moment in history and time that made speaking about kids and movement of particular interest to you? You mentioned a couple of things, but what is it about this moment that makes it feel so fundamental, so important?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical, and I've gone through this journey of really understanding the extent to which there's a linkage between movement and, let's call it, beyond physical health.
Hmm.
There's a linkage between movement and academic development, and we're seeing the extent of learning loss in reading, in math, in the scores
Right.
that come out, it seems like on a weekly basis,
Right.
and we see that kids are really struggling with playing
Hmm.
catch up. And we also see the extent to which there's this linkage between movement and mental health, social emotional health. And we as a sector, we're doing a better job of framing the health benefits of movement. So
Hmm.
we used to talk about move so that you don't get X disease 30 years from now.
Right.
And
Right.
that is not a great motivator.
Right.
And so moving so you feel better immediately is an incredible motivator.
Yeah.
So how can we instill that in kids so that they feel that and know that and can practice that over time?
So, talk to me a little bit then about where joy fits in from a scientific standpoint and the stickiness of these habits, especially with kids.
Yeah, so those of us who study, practice, preach, implement behavior change, it is really, and I often talk about this, it's very common sense when you think about it, that if you find something that you love to do and
Hmm.
brings you joy and brings you fun, whether it's in the movement world or if it's in any aspect of your life, if you love it and it brings you joy, you will do it over time. And
Hmm.
so that's very much the behavior science around establishing habits that you will do every day for a lifetime. So I spend a lot of time focusing on physical activity prescription, almost the prescribing physical activity almost the way you would prescribe medicine. And
Okay.
there you are really thinking about uptake and adherence.
Uh-huh.
Do you
Okay.
take it once? Do you take it many times over time? And so the behavior change world, we're really trying to establish these sticky habits. So, what
Hmm.
are the nudges that we can use to get people to move every day for the rest of their lives? So
Right.
they do live a longer life and a better life. And so starting early with kids and making it fun, leading with fun,
Uh-huh.
focusing on joy is so key, and there is a really robust evidence base that backs that up.
That's amazing. And so, is there a correlation between the age when you start or the uptake, as you say, and getting those long-term benefits? Is it understood that there's basically a formula for this, or are we still learning about this?
Yeah, well, I think, again, common sense. Inactive kids tend to grow up to be inactive adults. On
Mhm.
the flip side, active kids tend to grow up to be active adults. And so the earlier we can start with those habits, and one thing that I love about the updated version of the physical activity guidelines, so we had physical activity guidelines that came out in 2008, 2018. Hopeful that they'll come out again in 2028. For the first time in 2018, there were guidelines that did focus in on those kids who were
Uh-huh.
preschool 3 to 5 year level and talking about the importance of 60 minutes a day of aerobic, of muscle strengthening, of bone strengthening activity. And so we have those guidelines for the early childhood and recognizing that we need to start early, start often.
Yes. Like, so are we talking about it begins with tummy time and then you build, or are we looking at kind of preschool and before that, it's kind of the example setting that you talk about in your
Well,
book.
the physical activity guidelines do start with those 3 to 5 years. Before
Mhm.
they started after that, so it was children and youth, adolescents.
Uh-huh.
But we know that, physical activity levels decline as children age. So I think it's, like a quarter to 40% of kids meeting physical activity guidelines on the younger end of
Okay.
that range, but as they get up into their teens, about 15% meeting the guidelines, and it all sort of averages out to about 1 in 5 kids meeting those daily physical activity guidelines.
Wow.
So we've gotta get them moving early because if it's declining, we we wanna
Right.
start off high,
Right.
right? And then what can we do to ensure that it doesn't decline?
Right.
So some of the work that I've done with Physical Activity Alliance, which is a coalition of organizations that focus on promoting health and well-being through physical activity, we have a number of resources and we have a report card for how kids are doing with physical activity. Spoiler alert, we're not doing very well.
Mhm.
American kids get a D minus in overall
Wow.
physical activity. I think our higher grades are in sleep and organized sports participation,
Okay.
those indicators of whole child health, but not doing particularly well. So, what are the roadmaps, the guides that can help us as individuals, as organizations, as coaches, parents,
Yeah.
caregivers, help kids move more? And what are the strategies and tactics that we can put into play? What we have control over, and that's what I really talk about in
Right.
the book is what do we have control over? There are different touch points during a
Uh-huh.
child's day
Right.
that we can influence. We can influence their physical activity levels before and after school
Mhm.
by ensuring that they walk or bike to school.
Mhm.
Fewer than 10% of American kids walk or bike to school every day.
Wow.
Decades ago, it was half.
Right.
So it has just fallen significantly. So, how can we role model that active transportation? How can we support it? And then, how can we influence active play
Right.
after school?
Right.
How can we influence active play, organized sport participation on the weekends, in the evenings? And how can we be advocates for ensuring that our kids are getting sufficient activity during the school day?
Right. Right.
And I talk in the book about my experience really entering physical activity advocacy at the local and community level,
Mhm.
where I got my son this like little pedometer.
Right. Right.
And so he walked to school with me and he walked home from school with me. And in between, he was getting like 0 steps. I was like,
I
"You
read that with such recognition because we went through the same process.
right." And so I thought, well, how can we change that? So I went in, I met with them, I talked about what I was seeing. I talked about my role as a fitness professional. I talked about
Right.
the work that I do on the policy level nationally. I talked about what I do with clients, but I was just one voice.
Yeah.
And that wasn't enough. So I joined our district wellness committee and I actually sat on the committee for 10 years
Wow.
even after we'd left the school system because I believe so strongly in the power of all these organizations and motivated individuals coming together to ensure that our kids were moving more during the school day.
Right. Now, this kind of takes me to another topic that I'm really interested in. You talk, and I haven't flashed the book yet, Move to Live More. You dedicate 2 out of the 4 sections
Yeah.
in here to topics that I think a lot of people don't necessarily associate immediately with movement,
Mhm.
especially movement outside of organized
Sure.
sports, and that's mental health and academic development. That seems to tie into that during the school day.
Yes.
Do you recognize, any kind of pushback or resistance within schools to taking minutes away from learning, especially in the context of learning loss and kind of, what's your experience there and your learnings?
When I first conceived of writing the book, I really thought it would be a book about movement and physical health.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I was doing a project with a client, and actually, I feature the founder of this organization in the book. It's called the Daily Mile,
Okay.
and it's a free evidence-based program where classroom teachers, PE teachers work together to
Mhm.
ensure that kids are walking, jogging, rolling, or running a mile a day in during school time.
Okay.
And so I was doing research with the Daily Mile where I was doing these focus groups and I was really trying to understand the barriers to implementing this
Uh-huh.
program in schools. And exactly as you're describing, time was a huge barrier. We don't wanna give up time. We don't wanna give up minutes during the day,
Right.
and so needing to really demonstrate, show both from a anecdotal perspective, but also from a data
Right.
perspective, the fact that investing 10 minutes
Uh-huh.
in movement reaped 45 minutes, maybe even an hour in focused time where kids were able to regulate their emotions,
Mhm.
where they were able to concentrate and really be their best learners.
Yeah.
And it was through that research study, actually, it became two research studies, that I really thought about expanding the focus of the book to divided into those 4 areas where physical health was really just one of the 4, learning loss, as I just described, and then that mental health aspect, and then I added on a piece where it was really about role models
Right.
and parents and caregivers as active role models for kids and how we can balance, everything that we have going on in our lives to create the time and space to be active with our kids.
Right. Yeah, I Fit Kids, that's really kind of central to what Fit Kids does as well, and we've been talking about those connections and talking about the data that is out there to make that exact
Yeah.
case. And you talked a little bit about barriers, and of course, time is one barrier. You know, at Fit Kids, the central mission is to bring this access to underserved
Yes.
areas and children where there are other barriers, additional barriers. Can you talk a little bit about how that affects children,
Mhm.
access and equity, and your understanding of the work that's being done to support these kids who have kind of even additional barriers beyond what we've already talked about.
Yeah, and I love that's why I love the mission of Fit Kids because it's so aligned with my mission, which
Mhm.
is so much about expanding access to movement and what
Yes.
that looks like. And I've lived that a little bit
Mhm.
throughout my career. I worked with the Health and Fitness Association. I helped start their foundation. I still work with that foundation. It is very much about expanding access to health and fitness centers by removing those barriers,
Yeah.
by connecting health and fitness centers to their communities, by establishing scholarships that allow fitness
Mhm.
centers to do more than simply impact the health of members in their facilities, but to impact the health of their communities.
Right.
So, really thinking about how to connect schools and fitness centers so fitness professionals can go in and lead active after school programming,
Right.
or they can create programming that is affordable
Mhm.
and bring kids into the fitness centers. And so that's just one example of a private public partnership.
Uh-huh.
It's the work that I've done through the Physical Activity Alliance. We're thinking about how to connect all different types of sectors. So, schools to community to sport to healthcare,
Yeah.
and really thinking about how to meet the needs of kids who need movement the most. Because when you look at this report card that I
Mhm.
mentioned, the National Physical Activity Plan, the National Youth Sports Strategy, it all highlights the fact that we have really, really significant income disparities
Mhm.
in access to movement. We have really significant sex disparities in
Mhm.
access to movement. And we have really significant racial disparities in
Mhm.
access to movement. and how can we address those? And barriers include absolutely income, they include equipment,
Right.
they include transportation, and
Right.
so they're really significant barriers. And I always think about, how do we overcome the barriers? And I highlight. It came along a little bit late for the book, but a later podcast that I had where leveling the playing field almost
Uh-huh.
acts as a food bank
Uh-huh.
for used sports equipment. So
Yes.
they have people who donate it, they distribute it, and then they have people who are able to access it and give kids a chance to play organized sports, team or individual, that maybe perhaps they wouldn't have had.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's a big piece of what Fit Kids does as well with kind of providing the equipment because that's a big piece of it
It
in
is.
terms of making it fun and engaging, and varied,
Yes.
that the programming can be varied.
Yeah, I sit on a lot of panels with organizations that are doing really incredible work to try to address some of those disparities that we
Yes.
talked about. Of course, that's what I love about Fit Kids. And I often sit with school administrators who say, schools are one of the most equitable places to
Yes.
try to reach kids, to intervene around physical education, to try to intervene around in school physical activity movement. Maybe it's a before school program,
Right.
maybe it's an after school program,
Right.
but it's where kids are and spend their time. And
Mhm.
so, really using it maybe on its own or with a partnership with
Mhm.
another sector, but
Mhm.
really trying to move the dial on kids' physical inactivity through schools.
And I want to kind of go back to the community part. And you recently hosted Chris Powell of
Mhm.
Move 1 Million
Yes.
on your podcast, and
Yes.
I loved that one.
Oh, great. I loved it as well. Isn't he
It
incredible?
was incredible, and just the way that you both talked about community and how that brings joy, but the importance of community
Mhm.
in finding a love for movement and increasing movement. Can you talk a little bit about, beyond kind of these traditional, parents and traditional caregivers, what community can look like and what that brings to the equation?
Well, it brings joy. It brings fun. It brings, when I look at the pillars of lifestyle medicine, connectedness and
Yes.
community is right there, along
Yes.
with physical activity and nutrition. We know from a behavior science perspective, people who find others to move with are more likely to stick with movement.
Uh-huh.
It absolutely makes sense. I see it every day in the group fitness classes that I
Right.
teach. Oh, Susan's traveling this week, so that's why she's not here. But Becky, I thought that she was going to be here. Maybe I'll call her and
Right.
check
Right.
in and
Right.
see if anything's going on and make sure that we can welcome her back. So it's community members watching out for each other. And when you look at kids and movement, so much of the fun aspect comes from being with peers.
Right.
And as we grow up and become adults, we are so nostalgic for that play aspect to
Yes.
movement. We take it all out of it. It becomes something that we have to do. It's this chore, it's on our list of things that
Right.
we have to check off. And so it's exercise. It's not movement
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And so we're nostalgic for that active play piece when we were out there playing with our friends. So how can we ensure that community is a critical piece of it as we're kids and as we grow up to be active adults?
Can you also talk a little bit about the longevity of the habit? I was so fascinated by the historic reference to, medieval Japan and how this began and or not medieval, I guess it was
Yeah.
early 1900s
Yeah.
and how it just kind of continued and still continues to this day. And to me, that's kind of habit on that larger scale,
Right, have
right?
it as a group, and that's what I really appreciate about Move 1 Million, and not just the fact that I love Japan and have spent so much of my life, which was this hidden connection that
Yes.
we had that I wasn't even aware of, but yes, they modeled it on, Emperor Hirohito's recognition that to unite his country, he needed to and to help his citizens live longer, and now we look at
I
Japan as a
know.
success story
I
for
know.
longevity. It's extraordinary. We were just there last summer as a family, and
Mhm.
we were doing a pretty significant hike, and there were busloads of tourists everywhere except for where we were hiking, where we generally saw Japanese couples in their 70s and 80s doing these long hikes because
Incredible.
they're exactly, it's movement is a way of
Of life.
life.
And that's within 1 century
Mhm.
to have, I think the average lifespan he mentioned was 41.
Yeah, now they have just an incredible number of people who live to be over 100.
Right.
And I think he talked about, and I talk a lot about culture as
Uh-huh.
well,
Uh-huh.
changing culture. Are we a culture of movement? Or are we not a culture of movement?
Right.
And part of changing culture is that community piece.
Yeah. After talking about kind of all of these different ways of looking at this, what makes you most hopeful for the youth or this generation and how they will grow into a more active and, joyfully moving generation, hopefully?
I think I'm hopeful because of what we talked about, this reframing of movement as something that helps you feel better immediately.
Yeah.
I think what I'm also hopeful about is that we're now talking about movement so much as part of a much bigger whole child, whole
Yes.
person help.
Yes.
So, yes, it's movement. Yes, it's nature and moving outdoors. Yes, it's nutrition. Yes, it's stress management. Yes, it's community. It's all of those things.
Right.
When I started Move to Live More, I truly was thinking about moving for a longer life, but moving for a longer, better life.
Right. It's amazing. I mean, I think there is a lot to be hopeful for. And I think having big thinkers and researchers like you and community orgs, it takes that whole system. So it's been really great talking to you and learning. If you haven't already read the book, I recommend that you do listen to the podcast. So interesting. And I'm not a fitness buff, but I think there's just so much there, and you dive into so many different aspects of movement and what it means to us as humans. So, highly recommend it. Thank you, Amy.
Thank
It's
you.
wonderful having you today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.